communicated the essence of what you are saying without basically asking people to read or to look at what you are saying, but you have been able to arouse their emotions to interact with what you are saying. The next thing that I want to speak about is emphasis. And emphasis is a technique in oral communication that allows speakers to direct audience attention and underscore the most crucial elements of their message, so that it involves the strategic highlighting of specific words, phrases, or ideas through various vocal manipulations. I know we have all been to secondary schools, and so there was this for us that did English, there were these questions that used to come. You are given one sentence, and then they are underlined or words written in bold, and you're asked to explain different meanings of that sentence, so that you're working smarter. And then maybe the word smarter is written in bold or is underlined, depending with the school that you went to. And then the other thing would be the word harder itself is underlined. Then you are asked to explain the different meanings of those sentences. So then that speaks to the kind of focus that is derived, or the kind of focus that goes into those sentences. With emphasis, you'll find very skilled orators use different methods to achieve emphasis. That is, one, they would modulate their volume. That is, they would speak louder or softer. For us that are teachers and are very sonorous, we would speak louder to give a command. But then when we are in class and we are interacting with, you don't shout to students if you are teaching them. So you would basically speak to them in a softer manner. But then there was always this aspect of altering your speech. And then you would always adjust the duration of words. And when I speak about adjusting the duration of words, I'm talking about prolonging or clipping syllables. These techniques always transform an ordinary statement into a memorable declaration. So that, for instance, if you want to emphasize, to create an emphasis to listeners through the structure of an argument, you then reinforce key takeaways, and you will be able to create contrast, you'll be able to build anticipation, and you will also be able to evoke emotional responses. And you would see that in persuasive speaking, emphasis often plays a critical role in swaying opinions by drawing attention to compelling evidence or powerful rhetorical devices. You would see this in sales pitches. If you're asked to pitch something, or you're making a sales speech in a speech competition, how you emphasize what you are doing or what you're selling is what will ultimately convince adjudicators to buy your product compared to how your other competitors did. And mastery of emphasis requires not only technical skills, but also a deep understanding of content and context. It enables speakers to instinctively know which elements of their speech warrant special attention for maximum impact. Another example that I want to give you is the debate circuit is currently undergoing what we call a revolution, so that there are different circuits who want to do things differently. And one sentence would be, our new strategy is revolutionary. So how you say that word, if you prolong revolutionary, you would emphasize on how exactly that strategy is, or you would emphasize on the fact that your new strategy is more important than others because it has changed how things are, or it has changed how things are to be done, or it has changed how tournaments can be organized, such kind of things. That is exactly what emphasis does to one, that it allows you to highlight the importance of content words in what you're saying. The next thing that I'd want to speak on is pauses. And I'll begin with this quote that you can see on my screen. The right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. The reason why I chose this quote is because pauses are a powerful yet tools that people don't focus on. We have these speakers who are very good, but then they undermine the usefulness of pauses in their speech, and then they fail to realize that moments of silence would serve multiple important functions in their speech. These silence episodes would elevate a speech from a mere information delivery to an impactful presentation. You are, for instance, doing a presentation in class and you just want to read what is on your laptop or the leaves of papers that you have, and then you leave that place and people are just happy that you exited that stage. And that happens because you did not pause to allow them to interact with what you're saying. So when pauses are skillfully employed, you are able to create a dramatic effect. You are equally able to build tension, and you are also always able to make the audience anticipate. And the fact that they can anticipate what you are saying will always ensure they are captivated by the time you start speaking to the time you conclude your speech. The reason why pauses remain important is they will always provide listeners with valuable time to process and internalize information. You see, when you're teaching, for example, people about importance of, for instance, we have this disease that is currently coming up, referred to as mpox, and you want to tell people how they can avoid this disease, and you want to teach them that, one, they should always ensure they are able to identify the signs, like for instance headache, loss of appetite, these skin rashes that are there, and then they should always contact the Ministry of Health if they have interacted with someone who had that condition. You see, that is a whole load of information that you're giving to people. And if you do not employ pauses, these people will, for instance, remember the first thing that you said or the last thing that you said. That is why And the reason why it serves as the backbone of your speech is because it will always guide your speakers and your audience through a progression of ideas that build upon one another. You see, from the time I started talking, I started speaking, I showed you an outline. So that outline is what ensures this workshop or this presentation is very coherent. And coherent delivery also hinges on other factors apart from organization. That is the consistent use of language, terminology, and even tone, which would help you maintain a unified theme and prevents confusion. Imagine if I started speaking with just a flat tone and there was no emphasis. I'm just talking all through. I'm going to the next thing and I'm telling this number two, number three, number four. You would eventually get tired. And by the time I'm done speaking, you guys will be yawning and wondering whether I have overstretched on your time. So, as public speakers, we must always employ transitional phrases and sentences to bridge different sections of our speeches. And coherence will always involve maintaining a consistent level of complexity throughout our speeches and avoiding abrupt shifts that might disorient our listeners. So, if you are going to use visual aids, they should complement and reinforce your verbal message. I always discourage speakers from bringing a visual aid for the sake of a visual aid. In one of the parameters that we use for grading, you'd find use of visual aids merits, for instance, 8 marks. But then the fact that you just carried it and you want to score 2 marks when you have a better accomplished speaker who comes with these visual aids, knows when to pick it, knows when to drop it. That is what sets you apart from the rest. And that is why for people who decide to use humans as visual aids, the art of picking and dropping these visual aids is often what separates you from another speaker who simply brings up a human aid and still has that human visual aid there throughout their speech, even when their relevance is no longer visible. So a coherent delivery not only aids in audience understanding, but will always improve your credibility. And it improves your credibility by showing people that you have a thorough understanding of your subject and you carefully considered how you would best communicate it. So I'll give you one example, and I want you to listen to this example, and then we will be able to tell me where there are transitional phrases or where there are transitional markers. Today, we'll discuss 3 key points. First, the current market trends. Second, our response to these trends. And third, our projections for the future. I have talked to you about paces. I am now going to talk to you about coherence in delivery. I'll then proceed to speak to you about transitions in public speech. So allow me to invite responses from the audience on especially the first and the second sentence on where transitional markers would be placed, or I would invite them to identify transitional markers. Harold, this is where you come in. Harold, please.
Yes, Brian, pardon me for that.
All right. I would want you to help me identify speaker
All
members
right,
from
cool,
the
cool. So,
audience. Yeah,
okay, so from the audience within the chat space, it was basically
yeah.
Jane was saying earlier on that she wouldn't hear you clearly, but you've been clear the whole time. I think that has been fixed. Now, in terms of questions, I'm not seeing anyone like putting up their hand. So ideally, if you have any question from the beginning of what Brian has been able to cover in delivery, things to do with pacing, pausing, and emphasis, the types of intonation or tonality, you might want to be able to raise your hand right now. We shall give you a chance to unmute and then ask. If there's any clarity or you want him to draw more light on something that you don't understand, you can also do the same. If you feel shy, there's always a chat space. I believe chat space was meant for people who are shy. You can always just write your message down there. So in the meantime, Brian, there is no particular sort of message. Okay, someone has raised up their hand. All right, Richard, over to you, please. You can unmute and then ask the question.
All right, please. Harold, am I clear?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, you are
Richard,
audible.
please go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, Kanda and Harold, for this session. And now my question and concern is for the tournaments that we have been in, we've always had this issue, a case with the time that you have to deliver your speech. Take, for example, the pitch between speeches and you have a very limited time, that the demand of the speech needs you to incorporate all the elements that such a given speech is supposed to have. And that's why we've always had issues with the pace. I mean, how should we handle that well such that the speech remains with the elements that should compose?
Thank you for that question, Richard. Like I have mentioned, all these elements that I have said require practice. So it's not a question of you have a checklist and you're making your speech and you want to say, have I scored in pace? Yeah. Do I have a pause? No. It's a question of infusing one element after the other. For example, if you're speaking about intonation, just simply trying to construct a sentence with a rising intonation, that would be a question, or a definitive sentence, and then trying to construct a complex sentence that has both. You have a question, you have a sentence that has a rising intonation and a definitive sentence all in one paragraph. That is what builds a speaker. So it's not just a question of knowing how to do it, but a question of actually doing it and repeatedly doing it. These are not, as I speak to you as a trainer, these are not things that I can clearly have all of them in my speech, but I'm able to have all of most, or if not all of these in my speeches because of constant practice and because of constantly speaking. And that is why I keep telling you that what differentiates you and an average speaker is your ability to use more of these. And that is why in most of the metrics that we use, as for those who will come for EAUDC, you will see that we have this metric that has up to 8 points per aspect. So within this metric, your ability to score 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, the minimum is usually 3. So what will then earn you a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6 is your ability to integrate all these aspects within that specific element. If you're speaking, for example, about body language, I'll speak about it as my last item. What distinguishes you from this, you who uses body language all through their speech, and another person who uses purposeful body language, is ultimately what distinguishes you. So you should not actually be worrying about the time that you have, but worry about the much that you're able to use within the time that you have in respect to what you're speaking about. I hope that answers your question, Richard.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kanda.
Thank you. I'll proceed, Harold. If there's any question from the chat, you'll just stop me and tell me about the question. The
All
next
right,
thing
so I will do so in case there's any question. Maybe let me try to look at the chat. As of now, someone says, okay, I think it's something that Fred is saying. All right, I think Apia Katie is putting up their hand. So Katie, maybe you want to unmute and then ask the question. So is Katie on
Okay.
the call?
Yeah.
All right, cool, sure.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Kanda and Harold. What I want to ask today is about like when you're giving your introduction. Okay, it might depend on the task, but now I want you to talk about the statistics. Where do you give the statistics, and why do you give the statistics? And okay, how are they of useful in any task?
Thank you for that question. I have always advised that statistics should act as complements to your statements. And how does this work? The statistic should always, if you're going to take away the statistic, we should still remain with a statement that makes sense. If, for example, I want to say, in Kenya's Wings to Fly program, 86% of high school students transition to the university. So you see that 86% then augments what I'm basically speaking about this Wings to Fly program. Another way of saying that statement without basically using the statistic is listen to this sentence. In Kenya's Wings to Fly program, we have a higher percentage transition rate to the university compared to students who do not transition to the university. Basically, the difference between my first sentence and my second sentence is that the first sentence presents the exact picture as it is on the ground. The second one is very vague. It is one that can be challenged because 14% of, say, 10,000 people is a very significant number. But then if I want to tell you the impact that Wings to Fly program, for example, has had in this country, I would speak of 86%. And that would then make you think that perhaps out of 10 students that are sponsored in this program, then 8 transition to the university. But then I just say that majority of the students sponsored in this program transition to the university. 6 out of 10 is still a majority, but then 86% has more magnitude than basically saying majority transition to the university. 86% is the kind of statistic you would use if, for example, you are looking for donors to help you fund this program. So therefore, depending with what you're speaking on, statistics should always complement your argument. And the reason why we use statistics is also to try and arouse the empathy of our listeners. If I want to speak against FGM, for example, and I mention that out of 3 women who undergo FGM, only 1 makes it alive, and then someone else says there are women who die during FGM. If, for example, those 2 scenarios, then one presents a very dire need to act against FGM, and then the other simply presents facts in a very generic way, in a way that would not attract, for example, people to stop doing what they are doing and start focusing on the fact that 3 women undergo FGM and only 1 makes it alive. Thank you. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, all right. So maybe as that is answering the question, Mavis has put up their hands. You might just want to unmute and then ask, and then, yeah, sure, please.
Okay, my question is he made mention of outline. So I want to know, what are we supposed to do within that one? Most of the time they are given 1 minute before we speak. So what are we supposed to do within that 1 minute to make sure that our speech will be good for that 3 minutes?
Thank you for that question. By outline, I was simply saying that after you're done speaking, people should be able to know what was your introduction, what was in your body, and where your conclusion started. And I gave this example of this sentence that today we will discuss 3 key points. First, the current market trends. Second, our response to these trends. And third, our projections for the future. And then I begin speaking, so that if you ask someone, they will tell you that he started speaking by mentioning about what he will talk about. And then his first point was this, his second point was this. That transition is very clear. Or another example would be, now that we have discussed pauses, we shall proceed to now discuss coherence in delivery. That is how you mark transition. And the reason why I emphasize on an outline is, if you're given, for instance, 3 minutes, it means your introduction should not stretch beyond 15 seconds. At most, it should go to 20 seconds. And this is on the higher side, knowing that you have at least 10 or 15 seconds once your 3-minute time is up. But then you realize in very competitive stages, say semifinals or finals, time is a factor that could actually kick you out if people have to break a tie between you and another speaker. So an outline helps you, one, stay within time, two, inform the adjudication panel or inform your audience how your speech has been classified, and three, it helps them follow your speech. And that is with the use of first, second, third, or other speakers would use things like furthermore, additionally, nevertheless, however, unfortunately, such kind of transitional markers. Thank you. I hope that answers your question. Harold, I don't know whether there's any other hand or should I proceed? Harold.
Harold seems to have stepped out of the call for a minute. If maybe we can proceed.
All right. I think I'll just wish to retain my screen so I can personally control it now that Harold is no longer there. Just a minute. Yeah. So coherence was the next thing that I needed us to talk about. And coherence in delivery is one of the pillars of effective communication, and particularly in public speaking and presentation. And when you think of coherence, it refers to the logical and seamless flow of ideas throughout a speech, as we have been saying, and it enables your audience to easily follow and comprehend your message. And achieving coherence it requires you to plan for your speech and even requires you to ensure that your planning amalgamates into your execution. So that this organizational framework is what I have mentioned as the backbone of your speech. I think that I was clearly put. Allow me to go into the next thing, which was thank you. Transitions in public speech. So in public speaking, transitions serve as bridges between different sections. I think I had spoken about these, and these are the ideas that you have, the topics that you have, and transitions ensure that your audience can follow through your progression without feeling lost or feeling very disoriented. And the kind of transitional phrases that I have spoken about must be brief and must be concise. That is, they act as signposts. You see how you are going to a place and you just see a signpost that says 30 kilometers to Gingertown, for example, or turn left after 12 kilometers or bumps ahead. They're usually very brief and concise because you can't be having a transitional phrase that is a whole sentence. That will be very destructive to your listeners and it will make them lose the kind of drift that you are using. And the kind of transitional phrases that we're speaking about, because when we speak of a phrase, we are definitely speaking of 2 words or more. So we can have transitional phrases like, on a related note, we have been saying that transitions must be clear in your speech. So the word on a related note serves as a transitional phrase that shows people you're speaking about something that is similar to what you've just said. Or when you're taking them to a different aspect and you tell them, let's shift our focus to, it prepares your audience for a change of direction and it still maintains their engagement and facilitates a smoother processing of new information that you're now integrating into your speech. But then when you speak of transitional sentences, they offer a more comprehensive link between different parts of a speech. So unlike transitional phrases, transitional sentences are full sentences which provide context for the relationship between preceding and subsequent ideas. And transitional sentences often summarize key points from the previous section. You see how we are normally told in high school that the first sentence should be a topic sentence, then we have 3 to 4 supporting sentences, and the final sentence should be a concluding sentence. So those sentences that come after the first sentence are what we refer to as transitional sentences. And effective transitional sentences not only connect different segments of a speech, but also reinforce the overall structure of your argument. It helps you to weave individual points into a cohesive narrative so that you are able to guide your audience through different topics and ensuring that they understand and retain what you are saying. And then well-crafted transitions can always add rhythm and pace to a speech. It makes them very engaging because speakers are able to create a fluid and a logical progression that this audience is interested in, and this audience is able to get the central message of this entire presentation. And allow me to give you an example of a transitional sentence. One would read, while we've discussed the challenges facing our industry, it's time to look at the opportunities these challenges present. So that you look at this statement, one mentions that we have been discussing the challenges that our industry faces, so that it has been just been discussing problems all along, so that it's now transitioning to speak about the opportunities that have arisen because of these challenges or the advantages that these challenges have come with. And this will enable speakers to clearly see, one, you are speaking about in your speech, there's the aspect of challenges, and in your speech, there's also this aspect of the good that comes out of the bad. And then another sentence that I'd want to give you is, having examined our current position in the market, let's now turn our attention to where we want to be in 5 years. Or another one, having lost 500,000 Kenyan shillings clubbing, it is time for me to sit and organize my life and plan my bills. Those are examples of transitional sentences that help your listeners know you are speaking from this perspective and now you are shifting to this other. And I have said that transitional sentences would, one, provide or summarize previous information, or two, would provide a shift towards another information. The next thing that I'd like to speak on is techniques to improve vocal delivery. And these techniques, they are designed to enhance the quality, the control, and the effectiveness of a speaker's voice. So basically, anyone who calls themselves a public speaker or anyone who relies on their voice to communicate effectively must master vocal delivery. And one way of mastering vocal delivery is by using tongue twisters or what we call lip trills. And these lip trills help your vocal cords and articulatory muscles to practice on extended use and to reduce their strain and to improve the clarity of what you're saying. And so, one sure way of improving vocal delivery or of using lip trills is by controlling your breathing. I have always recommended the use of diaphragmatic breathing and sustained exhalations. How you do this is it increases your lung capacity and it helps you to maintain a steady vocal output through your long speeches. As you can see from the example that I have, or the image that I have used as an illustration, the lady is placing one hand on her chest and another one on her stomach. She will then breathe in slowly through her nose and ensures that her stomach expands while her chest remains relatively still. This happens especially in music festivals or in singing competitions. You are always told by your trainers, breathe through the stomach. This is what is now called diaphragmatic exhalation, because breathing through your stomach gives you control over your voice, unlike breathing through the normal trachea passage. When you breathe through the normal trachea passage and air runs out, you'll start producing a wheeze. Or if you're singing, you'll start stretching, and then you see these speakers who speak, and after some time they have something like a sore throat and they need to drink water. That happens because they are not able to use diaphragmatic exhalations. And volume control practices will always enable you to modulate your loudness effectively, because it will ensure that one, people can hear you clearly without you having to shout. And the next thing that you do when you are doing vocal delivery is you manage vocal fatigue. That is the use of proper hydration, or what we call vocal rest. You do this by regularly practicing and ensuring that your vocal performance contributes, like there's a consistent vocal performance for a long-term development of stamina, and it will always enable you to deliver your message with confidence. I have always said this, that us saying you practice by placing one hand on your chest and one hand on your stomach is simply from the theoretical perspective of it. But going then to put it into practice would mean speaking and trying to see if voice can come, or if your lungs can relax and voice will always seem. You see how you blow for us that come from communities who blow horns. You don't just blow horns by blowing air out of your mouth into that horn. It won't produce a sound. You have to bring this wind or this blow from deep inside your stomach, and this happens after you are a pro at diaphragmatic exhalations. The next thing that I want to tell you is, apart from diaphragmatic breathing exercises, you can, for example, repeat the following phrase. I'm thinking of a phrase like, the bluebird blinks its black eyes. If you're able to repeat such kind of phrases, or red lorry, yellow lorry, these kind of phrases enable you to improve your clarity. People are able to understand what you're saying, because these lip drills will help you articulate specific words and phrases in a way that will enable you to communicate effectively. And the next thing that I want to tell you is, language lies in its ability to reinforce or to complement or even sometimes contradict the spoken word. You will see a very good speaker speaking about something. For example, there's this speech that a friend told me about, and I would love to see, where a speaker was speaking on a nerve condition. And then this speaker was able to integrate how these nerve conditions manifest by saying what they were saying, and then they make their reactions delay. If you're speaking about happiness, this speaker would speak on about happiness. For example, they share about how they were able to enjoy their birthday with their friends and all that. And then all of a sudden, they speak about the fact that all that came to a standstill when they no longer have those friends. Then these nerve or these facial expressions precede these statements or these sentences. So then you see, with body language, when when you control, for instance, things like your hand movements, you are able to add emphasis to key points. And I have always advised speakers that simply throwing hands around, because most of us are natural, we naturally throw hands if you are speaking about something. So that is what then differentiates between you and a speaker who is an established, or a speaker who has really mastered their use of body language. Because simply throwing fingers would earn you an average mark. And then using appropriate body language is what would then earn you relevant marks. And I have always said this, that just like numbers or data or statistics, body language should also act as complementary segments of what you are saying. They should always augment whatever you're saying, in the context that even if you kept quiet after saying a certain sentence, your body language would leave a lasting impact. And maintaining appropriate eye contact is equally one way of establishing connection and conveying sincerity. Because although there are cultural norms that regard eye contact as very sensitive, or from a conservative perspective, body language is often subconscious, and it reflects inner thoughts and emotions. And that is why body language remain powerful tools that help you read others. You see how you see someone and you're able to tell whether this is someone you can interact with. It's because of the kind of rapport that is communicated by their body language. When you're simply exchanging greetings and how they express that greeting. There's a difference between me meeting you and saying hello brother, and how I shake your hand, or if you're gonna hug, how I hug you. All those convey the extent to which my hello should be delivered to you. And you must always note that when you decide to use body language, if for example you decide to use an open posture with a relaxed shoulder, you can, for instance, project approachability. But then, like I have said, controlled hand movements would create an emphasis on key points without simply being distracting. I'm this speaker who would focus on pocketing or start throwing fingers around. And then someone asked me why I do that, because it appears condescending. And then I reflect on it, and I'm to think of the art of simply um, uh, asking people to relate with what you are saying by how I twitch my hand movements. You see how politicians speak and they keep throwing, it's as though they are trying to cut the air with their fingers, so that for every aspect they say, they throw a hand. For every aspect they say, that is exactly what body language does, that it helps people to see what you are saying in a larger extent than how you would use body language. And another example that I want to use is, for example, if you stand with your feet shoulder wide apart, and like I have said, your arms are relaxed at your side, and when you do that, you convey openness and confidence. Or if you're emphasizing a point and you use a deliberate hand gesture, like throwing up your holding up three fingers when you are discussing, for example, 3 points, you then combine these with leaning forward slightly, you will be able to engage your audience and actually show them what you're speaking about, or the kind of numbers that you're speaking about. So that speaks to what I sorry had prepared for today. And before I conclude, I would want to leave you with this quote, that there are always three speeches for everyone you actually give. There's the one that you practiced, and there's the one that you give and the one you wish you give. I saw this meme that said, you know English until it's your turn next at an interview, and then that is when English leaves. I can't really put it as it was, but that is when English exits the room. So every speaker always has this the kind of audience feedback that they got in the course speech that then gives them a different speech, which is what they actually made. And then there's always the one that they wish they gave, so that after leaving that stage, they reflect on what they said and start thinking about how they could have made that better. I got that quote, and it's what I always want to reflect with and leave you with. So that being said, I have come to the end of my presentation, and I would want to invite questions and answers. Harold.
All right. Thank you, Brian, for that. In case anyone has any particular questions or any clarities, please indicate them in the chat space or feel free to raise your hand, which I put you. Oh, yes. Am I audible, Brian?
Loud and clear, Harold.
Yes. Kanda, can you hear me?
Yeah, sure, I can.
All right. What I'm saying is that, yeah, I can hear you. So I'm simply saying if anyone has any questions, they could like try to unmute or raise up their hands or any clarities. In case there are no questions, clarities, or any comments on the session today, we could also call it a day, and we could just want to thank Brian for having been able to show up amid his very busy schedule, because I remember you told me to remind you 36 hours to the day just so you don't forget because of how busy the schedule is. We thank you for always showing up and for loving the whole art of public speech. So in case anyone has any questions, please feel free, indicate within the chat space, or maybe we could call this the end. So because I don't think we're having any questions that are coming through, we thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for this particular session. We thank you for having been able to take us through the A to Z of delivering public speech. And quite literally, we think everyone has been able to learn something from this whole session. So from us to you guys, we thank you for having been able to come through. Yeah, so Mirembe Jenny says that it's a vote of thanks to Brian for having been able to show up. She says that thank you so much for the session and being passionate about young people. And in case any other comments, I believe this is like the end. Guys, thank you for coming. Thank you for showing up. We shall meet again next week on Monday when we shall have Martin Javan come to talk about content in public speech. Nonetheless, guys, from us to all of you, please do have a good night. And you can leave at will. Thank you.